Join me as I dive into the scariest campfire tales ever told and see if I can handle the chills they bring. Because once the fire begins to fade and the night starts listening, the line between story and truth begins to blur. Here's something most people don't realize. Campfire stories weren't just made to scare kids. They were created long before movies and books, told in flickering firelight, not just to entertain, but to protect. Some were warnings, some were rituals, and some, if you believe the old stories, were meant to keep certain things from waking up. But you know how it goes. Someone always tells the wrong story, or tells it in the wrong place. And then, something starts listening. Campfire tales stick with us because they tap into that ancient, unshakable fear of being vulnerable in the dark. Out here, where your phone's dead, the air smells like pine and silence, and help is at least 2 hours away. It doesn't take much to feel hunted. Most people joke about it, laugh it off. But when you're out there long enough, when the fire is the only light for miles, and the forest starts to go quiet, dead quiet, you realize something. The woods don't need to chase you. They just wait for you to lose your nerve. That's the kind of setting we walked into. It was early June. Warm days, cool nights. 5 of us had planned the trip for weeks. Me, Jeremy, Lauren, Nate, and Kai. We'd all grown up together, and this was meant to be our unofficial "we're still young" getaway before life pulled us in different directions. We picked Umpqua National Forest because it was remote, like really remote. No ranger station nearby, no other campsites in walking distance, and most importantly, no cell signal. Exactly what we wanted. We packed light, just 2 tents, some gear, way too much beer, and enough snacks to survive a small apocalypse. By late afternoon, we'd found a clearing near the river. The water was cold and fast. The trees towered like green giants, and the light broke through the canopy in golden shafts. It was the kind of spot you take a picture of for Instagram and never post, just to keep it for yourself. Setting up camp was easy. Nate and Kai handled the tents while I gathered firewood. Jeremy, he kept wandering toward the tree line, just staring. When I called out, he snapped out of it and smiled like nothing was wrong. But I noticed him glance over his shoulder more than once. That night, after dinner and drinks, the fire was blazing. Kai started telling dumb ghost stories, stuff you've heard 100 times. Hook-handed killers, ghost hitchhikers. Jeremy laughed, but he didn't join in. He just poked at the fire, his face flickering in the glow, eyes scanning the woods behind us like he expected to see something step out. I asked if he was okay. He just shrugged. "You ever notice how quiet the forest gets at night?" he said. "Like, too quiet. Like it's holding its breath." We all laughed it off, but I remember the way that sentence hit. Like something you joke about, but still feel in your bones. Later, as the others stumbled off to their tents, I stayed behind to smother the fire. That's when Jeremy came up beside me. He looked pale, even in the dark. He asked, "Did you see it?" I thought he was setting me up for a scare. I smiled and said, "See what?" He didn't laugh, didn't flinch, just said, "There was someone behind your tent, watching." I turned to look, but of course, there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. "Probably a raccoon," I said, forcing a laugh. But Jeremy shook his head slowly. "Raccoons don't stand still like that." We stood there for a long time, the embers casting just enough light to see the tension in his jaw. I told him to get some sleep. He nodded, but he didn't go to his tent. He sat down beside the cold fire with his flashlight still in hand and kept watch. That was the first night. We didn't know it yet, but something had already noticed us, and it wasn't going to leave. It was supposed to be a weekend escape. 5 of us packed into 2 cars and drove out to the heart of Umpqua National Forest. Me, Jeremy, Lauren, Nate, and Kai. We were in our 20s, overworked, and craving a digital detox. So we picked the most remote spot we could find, near a creek with no cell service and no one else for miles. Just the 5 of us, the sound of the river, and the glow of the campfire. The first night was exactly what we hoped for: loud music, drinks, dumb ghost stories, and laughter echoing into the trees. But Jeremy was off, quieter than usual. He kept staring past the fire, eyes scanning the woods behind us like he expected to see someone standing there. When I asked if he was okay, he just shook his head and said, "You ever get the feeling the forest is watching you?" We all laughed, but deep down, I think we'd all felt it. That low, crawling tension that settles in your chest when the wind dies and the woods go silent. Later that night, while the others were asleep, I sat by the fire and watched Jeremy standing next to his tent, frozen. He said, "Something was behind your tent earlier." It just stood there, watching. I told him he was probably tired or drunk, but he didn't argue. He just sat down by the fire with his flashlight and didn't sleep. The next day, Jeremy looked worse. Pale, eyes sunken. He said he heard it breathing outside his tent, that it was closer than before. That night, around 2 a.m, I heard it for myself. A strange, soft sound, like fabric under pressure. And then, something pushed against the side of my tent, right next to my face. I opened my eyes. There was a face pressing through the nylon. Not someone's shadow, not a trick of the light. The actual impression of a face, pale, stretched, and smiling. No eyes, no nose. Just that awful grin, inches from mine, like it was trying to seep through the fabric. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Then, it slowly pulled away. I shot out of the tent with my flashlight, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. No tracks, no sound, just the wind and the trees. Jeremy was already sitting by the fire, wide awake, gripping a knife. He looked at me and whispered, "It was at my tent too. It's getting braver." The third night, no one slept. We moved the tents closer to the fire, strung up bottles and tin cans around the camp like alarms, and stayed up in shifts. But by midnight, exhaustion was setting in. The forest was silent. Not peaceful silent, dead silent. Even the river seemed to hush. Then we heard it. The unmistakable sound of a zipper. Not ours. It came from the woods. A slow, steady zip, like a tent being opened. Jeremy stood up, shaking. "It's calling me," he said. I think I already let it in." Before we could stop him, he took off into the trees. We ran after him, calling his name, but the deeper we went, the colder it felt. The air was heavy, wrong. We started hearing things, breathing, low and wet, like something massive was just out of view. Then we saw him. Jeremy was standing in a small clearing, facing a tree. His flashlight lay at his feet, still flickering. He wasn't moving, wasn't responding, just staring. When I got closer, I saw it. A shape pressed into the bark. At first, I thought it was just moss or decay, but then I realized it was tent fabric, stretched across the tree like it had grown there. And in the middle of that fabric was a face. That same pale, stretched grin. It was part of the tree, part of the forest. And Jeremy, he was whispering something under his breath. I didn't unzip it, it unzipped me. Then, he stepped forward, and the tree opened. Just a little, just enough to let him in. And then it closed. No scream, no blood, no trace. We ran. Left everything. Didn't stop until we reached the road, barefoot and shaking. Rangers searched the forest. Found no sign of him. No tent. No clearing. Just empty woods. But last week, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo, an old Polaroid. It showed a tree somewhere deep in the woods. In the center of its bark, barely visible in the shadows, was a face. Pressed tight. Grinning. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were just 4 words. "You unzipped it too." That story still haunts me. And it's just one of many. Campfire tales like this work because they don't just frighten you. They remind you that the woods don't care if you believe. Fear lives out there, buried in the bark, stitched into old tents, whispered into the night by things we'll never understand. So if you ever feel something pressing against your tent at night, don't unzip it. Some stories are better left untold. Have a terrifying campfire story of your own? Drop it in the comments. I might read it next time. And if you made it this far, don't forget to check out more of my creepy content. The fire might be out, but the forest? The forest is still watching. Did you know abandoned quarries are considered one of the most haunted kinds of places in North America? That might sound dramatic, but it's true. Hundreds of unregulated pits, long since shut down and forgotten, now sit half submerged in water or dry and cracked like scars in the earth. Some go so deep they never filled. Others are sealed off entirely. Over the years, people have gone missing near them. Entire towns have been abandoned around them. And yet, they remain silent, patient, as if waiting for someone to come too close. Campgrounds are built for people. Quarries were carved by people. But they were never meant to host us. Something about them feels wrong, unnatural, like the earth wants them gone, but can't quite cover them up. This story takes place in one of those forgotten scars. It starts like most stories do, with someone just looking to get away. Chris and Sarah had been together for years. They were both middle school teachers in Portland. Kind, tired, and drowning in emails. They'd taken this trip to escape noise, stress, and screens. To unplug, to reconnect, to breathe again. They chose a little-known campsite in Oregon's backcountry, one that Chris's co-worker had mentioned during a lunch break. No cell service, no traffic, just the two of them, a tent, and the sound of nature. Or so they thought. They arrived late on a Friday afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long golden rays through the forest. The air smelled like pine and wet dirt. They pitched their tent, lit a fire, and made simple camp food: canned chili, instant coffee, cheap wine from a metal mug. It was quiet, beautifully, blissfully quiet. Chris joked that this was the first time in months he hadn't heard a single notification buzz. Sarah laughed and toasted the silence. But that's when they first noticed it. The silence wasn't normal. There were no birds, no insects, no frogs or chirping crickets, no rustling in the underbrush, just wind, and then, even that seemed to fade. It was a kind of quiet that felt almost designed, like a stage waiting for a performance to begin. Chris waved it off, saying nature always felt extra spooky right before dusk. But Sarah furrowed her brow. She had grown up around forests. This wasn't that kind of quiet. It was stillness. After dinner, they took a walk beyond the tree line to explore before it got too dark. About 15 minutes up an overgrown trail, they saw it. At first, it looked like a landslide, a wide, black gouge carved into the hillside. But as they got closer, it became clear that it wasn't natural. They had found a quarry. Rusted yellow equipment lay scattered like forgotten bones. A crumbled wooden sign hung sideways from rusted chains, its words faded and illegible. The edge of the quarry was surrounded by collapsed caution tape and poles barely holding themselves upright. The hole itself was wide, easily the length of a football field, and deep. So deep that when Sarah dropped the stone into it, they never heard it hit bottom. The walls were jagged, like torn skin. Vines and roots hung over the lip like nervous fingers. It was dark down there. Not night dark. A different kind of dark. A depth that pulled at the eyes and made your ears feel full. They didn't know why, but both of them took a step back at the same time. Chris said it was cool, creepy even, and they should come back in the morning with sunlight to see it better. But Sarah shook her head. It feels like it's waiting, she said. They left quickly. The woods around them seemed to have darkened too fast, like the sun had skipped ahead. Back at camp, the fire didn't seem as warm. They didn't say much. Sarah kept glancing toward the trail they had just returned from. Chris noticed it, but didn't press. He didn't want to admit it, but something felt off. Neither Chris nor Sarah slept that night. The forest wasn't peaceful. It was dead. No wind. No insects. Just a silence that pressed in from all sides like a vacuum. Around midnight, they heard it. A sound, soft, dragging, like breath across gravel. At first, it seemed distant, but then it circled the tent. A whisper, then two, then many. The air grew colder. Chris thought it was wind moving through rocks, until the whispers began saying their names. Chris, Sarah, faint, like someone speaking through a clenched jaw just outside the tent wall. He froze. So did Sarah. They both heard it. Chris unzipped the tent an inch and shined his flashlight. Nothing. No movement. No voices. But the air felt thick, charged. The whispers faded, but the feeling didn't. Something had changed. They said nothing the rest of the night. In the morning, they laughed it off, blamed the wind. But Sarah barely touched her coffee. Chris noticed her eyes kept drifting toward the trail. Later, she walked to the edge of the campsite and bent down. In her hand, a small, perfectly round stone. On it, carved deep and clean, their names. One on each side. They hadn't brought carving tools. Chris took it from her and threw it into the woods. "We're leaving," he said. They packed quickly and started back down the trail. But something was wrong. The trail that had led them in was gone. They circled, turned back, followed their own footprints. Somehow, they ended up back at the same clearing by the quarry. Chris cursed. Sarah stared at the trees. Then, the whispering returned. Not from around them this time. From beneath them. From the quarry pit. Chris, Sarah. Slow, wet voices echoing up from the deep rock below. Sarah dropped to her knees. "It's not a pit," she whispered. "It's a mouth." Chris pulled her back. "We're not staying another second." They grabbed their gear and ran. No trail, no direction. Just instinct. Branches ripped at them. Roots tried to trip them. The forest pressed in like it wanted them lost. And somewhere underneath, the whispers followed. The next morning, they packed up early. Neither had slept. Sarah's eyes were bloodshot. Chris kept glancing toward the tree line, flinching at every creak of the wind. They hadn't spoken about the whispers, about the names, about the cold that seemed to come from beneath them. But when they reached the trailhead to leave, Sarah stopped. She was holding something. A small rock, perfectly round, with their names carved into it. One on each side. Not scratched, not written. Etched. They hadn't brought any carving tools. Chris demanded they leave now. They began down the trail, but it didn't lead to the parking lot. They looped back. Tried again. Same thing. The path circled, disoriented them, dropped them back at the clearing by the quarry. The whispers returned before sunset. This time, there was no mistaking it. They came from beneath the earth, from cracks in the stone, from the seams between roots. The voices were no longer distant. They were close, right under them. Sarah began muttering. Chris couldn't make out the words. She walked to the edge of the quarry, staring into the black, unmoving pit like it was speaking in a language only she could hear. Chris grabbed her arm. She resisted. That's when the ground moved. The dirt beneath their feet cracked, just slightly, like something massive had shifted far below. Sarah dropped to her knees. She whispered, "It's not just a hole, it's a mouth." Chris didn't wait. He grabbed her, pulled her away from the edge, and they ran. No path, no markers, just instinct. Branches tore at them. Roots tripped them. The forest closed in like it didn't want to let them go. But eventually, they made it. Back to the road. Back to the car. They drove in silence. No music. No talking. When they got home, Sarah never mentioned the quarry again. But sometimes, late at night, Chris would wake up to find her sitting in the living room, whispering, staring at something he couldn't see. Sometimes, she held a rock in her hand. He never checked if it had a name on it. Some places were never meant to be unearthed. Some pits weren't dug, they were found. And whatever lives down there, it remembers the voices that spoke its name. Have you ever stumbled across something that shouldn't have been there? A cave too dark to be natural? A staircase in the woods? A hole that seemed to go down forever? If you've ever looked in, ask yourself this. Did you hear anything whisper back? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, check out the other terrifying stories in this series. But be warned, the deeper you go, the more it hears. Join me as I share another terrifying campfire tale, one passed down in hushed voices, barely above a whisper. Because not all things in the woods want to chase you. Some just want you to look at them. And once you do, they never go away. Here's a chilling fact most hikers don't know. Every year, dozens of old trails are quietly removed from park maps across the U.S. Not because of flooding, erosion, or construction, but because people come back changed. Stories start piling up, people hearing voices, seeing figures in the trees, becoming disoriented in places they've hiked for years. And sometimes, people don't come back at all. These places exist outside what we understand. They aren't haunted in the way you think. They're ancient, preserved, places where something older than myth still breathes beneath bark and moss, waiting for someone to see it. Really see it. This story takes place in one of those places. It was supposed to be just another weekend hike. A group of 4 friends out to unplug, reset, and enjoy a little wilderness. Derek was the planner. He'd mapped the route and double-checked the gear list. His girlfriend Lacey handled snacks and first aid, always prepared. Marcus was the comic relief. Loud, sarcastic, carried a Bluetooth speaker that never left his side. And Jen was the quiet one. She was thoughtful, observant, always watching, like she saw things the others didn't. They chose a 3-day trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Nothing too intense, but remote enough that they wouldn't hear cars or see anyone for miles. The first day was smooth. They followed the main path up through the forest ridges, stopped at a waterfall, and made camp by a river. That night they laughed, told stories, cooked hot dogs over the fire. It felt like freedom. But on day 2, Derek suggested a shortcut. He'd found it on an old topo map, faded from a gear shop bulletin board. It showed a trail that cut straight through a forested valley, shaving a day off their loop. It wasn't on their phones, not on Google, not on all trails, but it used to be there. It was exactly the kind of off-grid thrill they wanted. They debated for maybe 10 minutes. Lacey was hesitant. Jen said nothing, just stared at the valley below. Marcus laughed and said it was probably just an old moonshine road. Derek smiled, confident. "Come on," he said. "What's the worst that could happen?" They left the marked trail at noon, and within the first 15 minutes, the temperature dropped 5 degrees. The sun dimmed. The trees changed. They were thicker, closer together, older, some with bark split wide open like wounded skin. The air smelled of wet stone and cedar sap. At first it was beautiful, magical even. Then they started seeing the symbols, carved into trunks, burned into fallen logs, spirals, circles with slashes, triangles pointing downward. At first they joked, said it looked like something from a horror movie. But the deeper they walked, the more frequent the symbols became. Some fresh, some so old they were nearly swallowed by bark. Then came the bones. First, small ones, twigs wrapped in twine. Then, bird skulls hung from fishing line in the trees. Finally, a deer rib cage nailed to a stump with a single rusted nail. The forest wasn't just untouched. It had been marked. Derek tried to laugh it off, but his voice was thinner now. Jen finally spoke. She said the symbols weren't decorative. They're bindings, she said. They're meant to keep something in. That's when they realized something else. The trail was gone. No footprints. No broken branches. No sign of where they'd come from. It was as if the forest had sealed behind them. The group made camp near a shallow, dry creek bed. It was the only clear space they could find. The trees leaned unnaturally overhead, like they were eavesdropping. No birdsong, no wind. Just the constant feeling of being watched. Marcus tried to lighten the mood with music, but the Bluetooth speaker wouldn't connect. His phone showed 83% battery, but the screen flickered and froze. Lacey's flashlight kept dimming even with fresh batteries. Derek's compass spun lazily in all directions. Jen quietly unpacked her sleeping bag and kept glancing at the treetops like she was waiting for something to appear. As night fell, the silence grew deeper. Not peaceful, loaded. The fire crackled, but the warmth barely reached beyond their circle. That's when they noticed it. A tree at the edge of their clearing. It hadn't been there before. Tall, thin, crooked, bark darker than the others. Its top vanished into the canopy. It didn't move. It didn't sway, but it felt aware. Marcus pointed. Has that thing been there this whole time? No one answered. Then Jen whispered, "That's not a tree." They all looked and realized she was right. It was too smooth, too narrow. Its base looked like a rootless leg. Its body curved in impossible ways, like bones had been stretched and twisted. And its head, a featureless bulge, tilted slowly as if it was listening. Lacey screamed. The fire surged, then died out instantly. When the light returned, the figure was gone. They scrambled into the tent together, locking zippers, clutching flashlights that barely worked. No one slept. Outside, the forest was too quiet. Just before dawn, Derek opened the tent a crack and saw it again, closer this time, standing just outside the ring of camp. No eyes, no face, but its head was turned directly toward them. He blinked. It was gone. They left everything behind and ran at first light. But every path they followed twisted back into itself, like the forest had rewritten its trails. They passed the same moss-covered log twice, then again, and eventually they found the altar, a circle of stones and bones, symbols etched in blood and soot. In the center, a perfect circle of soil, black and untouched. The trees surrounding it all leaned in like they were kneeling. Marcus backed away. "We need to go, right now." But Jen was already walking toward it. She knelt down and whispered, "It's not just watching us. It's waiting." They left at first light, or tried to, but no matter which way they walked, the woods brought them back to the same place. The valley, the trees, the altar they hadn't seen before. It was in the center of a clearing made of piled stones and bones. More of those twisted symbols carved into the rocks. In the middle, a circle of black earth, untouched by leaves or moss. When Lacey stepped too close, the wind picked up. A groaning sound rolled through the trees, like 100 voices trying to speak at once. And then the figure was there, the thing in the trees, closer this time, taller than before, head bent forward like it had grown heavy from watching, long arms at its sides, fingers nearly touching the ground. Its skin twitched like it was breathing from under the bark. Derek screamed. Marcus ran. The thing didn't chase them. It didn't need to. Because the moment you see it, truly see it, it knows you. It follows. Not on trails. Not on paths. In reflections. In shadows. In the gaps between blinking. They finally made it out of the woods hours later, sunburned and dehydrated. A ranger found them walking the highway barefoot. They didn't speak for a long time. Not until the next morning. Derek said it was still watching. Marcus refused to sleep indoors ever again. Said walls cast shadows too. Lacey's phone kept turning itself on at night, showing pictures of trees. And Jen stopped talking altogether. But one day, she took a red pen and started drawing something over and over again on her bedroom wall. A tall, thin figure standing among crooked trees. Underneath it, 3 words in shaky block letters. I looked back. They say there are things in the forest that were never meant to be named. That if you stare too long into the tree-line, something stares back. If you've ever hiked a trail and suddenly felt watched. If you've ever caught a shape between branches that you thought was a tree until it tilted its head, then maybe you already know. Don't stare. Don't stop. And whatever you do, don't look back. If you've heard stories like this, or seen something strange in the forest, share it in the comments. And if you're brave enough, check out the other horror tales in this series. But be warned, once you've seen it, it never stops watching.